It's a little bit of a TLC day here in the Kane household, especially after we experienced a few days of stress. It's just helpful to be able to take a day to kind of unwind and relax and recoup. But not only that, but also to reflect and to ponder and to meditate upon some of the lessons that perhaps God's wanting us to learn from some of the hardships that we face. And so it's from those reflections and musings that I want to share just a few things with you all today that I think might be helpful regarding how my faith has evolved during times of hardship, and specifically times where either myself or my family's safety and health is in jeopardy. This is something that's been a brand new experience for me since moving here. It seems like death and mortal peril is not as far from a reality as what I was used to growing up in the U.S. I've attended more funerals in the year and a half of living in Sierra Leone than I have my entire life in the U.S., and the majority of those funerals have not been of the aged, but rather children and those in their 20s and 30s. And so with that in mind, I've had to learn maybe how to process when either myself or my family are in a situation when our health is compromised. So I hope some of these things will not only be helpful for me to be able to express as I'm working through them internally, but also be helpful for you to hear, as I'm sure perhaps the majority of us go through times and experiences in our lives where death or serious harm is closer than what you thought it was. And perhaps some of the things in this video would help equip you with maybe some things to think about in preparing for occasions like that or getting you through a time like that. So welcome to the channel. My name is Dan. I moved my family from the U.S. in 2020 to the West African country of Sierra Leone to teach the gospel. And really since that point, I've been uploading videos to this platform, sharing some of our experiences and observations and lessons and a lot of other things. Perhaps before I share some about my own personal response to hardship and to mortal peril, it'd be helpful to give a little bit of context for where I'm coming from and a little bit of some of those scenarios that the Lord has placed me and my family in over this past 18 months that have really forced me to try to evolve my thinking and evolve my response to be better during those occasions. First off, and really this was maybe the biggest one, is just over a year ago, I experienced some pretty significant health challenges when I contracted malaria, typhoid, and dengue fever simultaneously. So I was kind of rushed to a healthcare facility in Freetown, and I was informed by the doctor that if I was a few hours later, that I wouldn't have pulled through. The second occasion was several months after that. Eden smashed her thumb in a door that then created an opening for bacterial infection that then spread to her body that lasted for a pretty high fever for about a week or so. That was a pretty big scare for our family. And then most recently, a few days ago, that same daughter, our 2-year-old Eden, just had a fight with malaria and typhoid. And so we spent 3 days in the hospital, her hooked up to IVs, getting round-the-clock treatment in order to help her pull through that. But thanks be to God, through so many answered prayers, she's now back home and regaining energy and strength, and her recovery is still ongoing. But it is looking wonderful as far as her health is concerned, and so we're thankful to God for that. Maybe the first thing I'll share real quick is that these scenarios are really tough, and the things that I am going to be sharing about what I've learned about it, they've not yet made it easy. They've not yet made it like stress-free and worry-free. During times like these past few days when I'm sitting by my daughter's side and She has these tubes attached to her, and she's having a shaking spell because the parasite count within her little body is just so high. It is the most agonizing thing I have ever experienced, and I am certain that any parent that has gone through anything similar can attest to that. So this is not easy, it's not fun, it's agony. However, I feel like the Lord has been teaching me and evolving my faith to handle situations like this in a better way. And so the result of God repeatedly putting me in a situation where either my own health or the health of one of my family members is at risk, the result of that is that my faith has grown, but it's grown because I believe I've changed what I am trusting God to do in those scenarios. So let me break down what I mean by that. Somewhere along the line, and I can't pinpoint exactly when this transition happened, but somewhere along the line, when I was in those dark moments where my own health or the health of my family was at risk, I began to develop a craving, and eventually I gave into the craving of wanting to trust God that He was going to protect my family from death. That when I was experiencing typhoid, dengue fever, malaria, when my daughter was going through various infections, when my wife was having an unassisted home birth, that God was going to protect us from death. And I'm not sure I even spoke it out loud, but that's what I really wanted to believe. I wanted to believe, I had this deep internal craving that God would protect me, that God would take care of my family's physical safety. The problem with that is that trust has the potential to disappoint and be broken. And the reason why trusting God that He will protect my family from mortal peril is a faith and a trust that can be broken and can be disappointed is because God never promises to do that. God has not made the promise that, Dan, no matter what happens, your family will be safe. He doesn't make that promise. And in fact, looking through Scripture, His priority and His prerogative has never been the physical safety of His people, but rather the spiritual safety of His people. And sometimes those things do not align. And if you're questioning this, maybe you should ask Jesus on whether or not God's highest priority was Jesus' health and safety. Ask the Apostle Paul, ask the 12 disciples, ask Stephen, the first martyr, ask parents of children who have died to cancer. Like, God's number one prerogative and number one promise is not to protect us from death. And so if I trust that God is going to protect my family from death, then I'm trusting in something that God has not promised to do. And therefore, that faith could lead to disappointment and even heartbreak and depression. And the second downside of putting your faith in something that God has not explicitly promised is that faith will never be confident. It will never be a strong faith and a strong trust. It'll be weak. And that's because at least for myself, I know the Bible too well to put my confidence in something that God has never said. Now, I think it's right to be able to ask God to protect us and to be able to plead with God for physical protection for ourselves and for our family members. But when we do that, our confidence needs to be in God choosing the best thing and not God choosing the thing that I want Him to do. And that's really what it came down to for me. So instead of putting my trust into something that God has not promised, which in the worst case scenario will lead to a broken trust, in the best case scenario will lead to a weak trust, instead of doing that, I've chosen to put my trust into God doing something He has promised to do. And that faith and that trust that I'm giving God, according to Romans 8 in verse 28, for we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God. That God makes a promise to me that no matter how tragic or how uncomfortable or how heartbreaking a scenario could be in this life, that it will always be for good, that God will cause good to come out of that circumstance. That is what I trust in. Not that God would have the desired outcome of my family making it through every health scare and injury. No, that's not what I'm putting my trust in. But my trust is that whatever does happen, whatever God chooses to bring about, it is the best thing, and that it will cause good for his people. And I think this principle is illustrated just beautifully and powerfully, at least to me, in the story of Lazarus' resurrection in John 11, where Jesus, although he had the power to protect Lazarus from death, chose not to, so that the faith of his disciples would benefit and would grow from that. So God cares more for faith than he does for physical health. And I need to be willing for God to be able to make that call in my life and in my family's life. That if God in his infinite wisdom and his infinite knowledge sees that one of my family members' death would result in the faith of someone else or a multitude of people growing, then I need to be willing to surrender that to God and say, God, you will cause good for your people, no matter the circumstance, no matter the outcome. And I trust you to do that. So when I'm sitting next to my child in a West African hospital room, and she has IVs attached to her, and she's not herself, she hasn't been herself for days, and she's having episodes of shakes and chills because the bacteria count within her body is so high, I don't trust that God will certainly pull her through that sickness. That's not a promise that God has given me, but God has promised me that if she doesn't, it is because God in his, again, infinite wisdom, infinite knowledge, was going to bring about good from that outcome. Because I am preparing my daughter, if I have anything to say about it at all, to be like a beacon of light, of faith to the people that she encounters for the rest of her life. Like an exhibit of the value of knowing God. Like that's what I'm training, and that's my prayer for my daughter. Therefore, if something were to happen and God were to choose to take my daughter before that could become a reality, I have confidence that there is a better plan that God had than the one that I had, because God's a better plan maker. And that is something that would be hard for me, and it is hard for me, but I find peace in that place of knowing that God knows best. God makes this promise that if something tragic were to happen to me, it would still be something that in God's perspective, and in perhaps even my own after time, I would say, this was good. And that's the promise that God's made me, and that is what I trust God to do. So thanks for hearing me out. I appreciate you guys just having an open ear to some of these things. This is not at all something that I've mastered or feel like I am where I want to be when it comes to my peace and my trust and my faith in God during these scenarios, but I just give so much thanks and praise to God that he's helping me through it. I'm so thankful to be living here in West Africa, where I am put in situations of testing, of stretching, of really God growing me in areas of my life that perhaps wouldn't have been grown and matured if I had stayed in the U.S. So I thank God for that. For all of those who are following us on maybe Instagram or Facebook and were aware of some of the health challenges that my family is facing and prayed for us, thank you so much. We thank God for you all. And as always, thanks for all the comments, all the kind words that you all share on these videos. They really mean the world to us. We appreciate them. Keep them coming. We read every one. I'll catch you next time.